Behn writes Orinoco partly as political commentary that is indirect and something we would not notice, about things that have nothing to do with with slavery itself. Behn is a monarchist. She is a Tory in her party's terms, in her era's terms. A Tory is opposed to a Whig, someone who believes strongly in a 17th century Tory believes strongly in hereditary privilege, in the nobility, the aristocracy, and very much in the monarchy, and believes in that social hierarchy. Part of her critique of the colonists is that they are Whigs, that they are not Tories, and also that they are lower people who are middle class and sniveling and not themselves noble. Behn doesn't necessarily come from the aristocracy herself, far from it, but she is employed as a partisan writer who supports the aristocracy. I would also point out she writes at a moment when the monarchy is having one of its crises. She's writing on she's writing this play on, I'm sorry, she's writing this novel slash romance on the verge of the second revolution the English had just in the 17th century. In the 1640s, they have the English Civil War, which culminates in 1649 with cutting off Charles I's head. They put him on trial first. That's progress, at least. Charles I is not the first English king whose subjects killed him, but previous kings, they would sometimes say, stage a hunting accident. This one, it was on the level. They told everyone what they were doing, they cut it off. And I would point out, Caesar makes clear he has heard of the execution of Charles I and he laments it. It's a bad thing. When this book is written, the execution of the King of England is less than 40 years in the past. It is more recent than the moon landing, Watergate. People were still alive who remembered that execution. More to the point, Charles I's second son, James II, is in crisis because he has a religion that the rest of the country, and especially Parliament, does not have. Having fought a revolution already, partly for the right to not be Catholic, to not have the king impose his personal religion or the kind of Catholicism light Charles I seemed to favor on Parliament and the kingdom. England was now faced with a monarch who was himself Catholic and of a religion they didn't share and didn't want and felt negatively about, that they feared he would impose. And there had been talk about skipping him out of the line of succession, letting Charles II, his older brother's bastard son, be king instead, of excluding him from the succession. He's become grudgingly allowed to become king, and he's about to be pushed out. Shortly after this novel was finished, James II was pushed out. He fled the country, frankly. In fact, he fled the country twice. The first time he tried to get away, some people captured him and brought him back. They were supposed to let him get away. He runs to France. His Protestant son-in-law comes over from Holland and becomes king with James I's daughter as queen. This is the famous William and Mary. Behn is a partisan of the king. She thinks it is wrong that a king should be judged by mere subjects. Her dislike of slavery here, on one level, she's using Orinoco and Caesar as a metaphor for a monarch being mistreated by the middling folk who she feels are beneath him. This is an argument that maybe is not obvious to us and not something necessarily sympathetic to us. She is using African characters as a way to critique the Europeans, not because she legitimately believes in the nobility of Africans or their dignity or even their full humanity, but because they're convenient for beating up on her domestic political enemies. Here is the middle of page 61. Caesar is getting his group together to start his revolution, And Behn talks about how the English are mostly unarmed. For the English had none, no weapons, but rusty swords that no strength could draw from a scabbard, except the people of particular quality took care to oil them and keep them in good order. The guns also, unless here and there one, or those newly carried from England, would do no good or harm, for it is the nature of that country to rust and eat up iron or any metals but gold and silver. And they are very inexpert at the bow, which the Negroes and the Indians are perfect masters of. Let me stop there. We discussed the weapons, and on one level, because this is a novel-like romance, or it's novelistic here, that is a literal description. Hey, it's extremely humid in Suriname. And, metal rusts quickly if it's not cared for. I want to point out a few things. We have but we also have the images she chooses become naturally figurative. They reflect larger, or imply larger truths you want to get across about her vision of these English people at this place in Suriname. Notice it's a few swords by people of particular quality. She goes out of her way to tell you the aristocrats or the gentry have taken care of their swords, where most of these people are a rabble. They are not military enough. They don't care for their swords. They're neglecting it. Same thing with the guns. Not only here or there are new from England. I will also point out the idea that iron rusted in this, that all metal corrodes except gold and silver. I am going to take, if this were something I were doing passage analysis for on the final exam, this passage won't be on it, but this is the kind of thing I would do. I would say, okay, everything, only gold and silver doesn't rust. Right. The military metals in Suriname, the iron, the steel, these corrode, as do the military virtues. Only gold and silver is preserved, i.e., the metals that involve money. And remember, Behn has an ideology where the merchant class is morally below the military aristocrats. The Whigs are the party of the merchant class. This can be hard to understand in a United States context where our business class is largely our ruling class, that we are ruled by merchants and lawyers. 17th century England has a class above the businessmen, the lawyers, that looks down on them. The hereditary landowning military aristocracy that Behn doesn't belong to, but believes in. So the rusting swords, but the uncorroded gold and silver, show problematically for Behn a merchant class that is in charge in Suriname. And here's the thing. Suriname is being used here by Behn as a metaphor for England itself. A place where traditional virtues that she believes in she feels corroding, where mercantile virtues, business virtues are in ascendance and should not be, and the enslaved prince becomes an image of the beleaguered king. The British don't have Suriname anymore. During the period Behn writes of, it got traded, not conquered in a war with the Dutch. It got traded. Trading seems bad to Behn. Now, the British in this period are building their great trade empire. Their mercantile virtues and their mercantile values are going to make them the most powerful country on earth for a long stretch of time. But Behn doesn't like those virtues. Suriname does not get conquered by the Dutch. Suriname gets traded away in the treaty negotiations after a war the English won. How do you give up this sugar colony? Suriname was a sugar colony. It's now an independent nation. It was producing sugar to be exported back to Europe, and this was enormously profitable. The British, for reasons of geographic consolidation, swapped it. They swapped it. Hey, we're going to do this. You're going to pass this treaty. We'll give you Suriname if you give us one of your colonies in the Western Hemisphere. They traded Suriname for New Amsterdam. They traded Suriname for Manhattan, for New York.